Welcome back, everyone. Today we're tackling the last part of our cross-text connection series, involving the hardest questions. At this level, you'll need to think more critically about subtle differences, deeper assumptions, and how scholars build on or challenge each other's work. Remember, pause the video before each explanation and solve the question on your own. Then hit play and we can go through it together. So with that, let's jump into the first question. Pause the video now and read both texts about the authorship of the two noble kinsmen and decide what both Sykes and the scholars from text 2 would most likely agree on. When you're ready, hit play. So here's the setup. In text 1, Sykes argues that Fletcher's contributions to the two noble kinsmen are obvious. Fletcher's writing style is so distinct that it's easy to spot which lines are his. Text 2 is reflecting modern scholarly consensus. It agrees that Fletcher wrote most of the middle acts and that Shakespeare wrote the first and last acts. This is based largely on differences in writing styles. So let's go through the choices. Choice A is looking good. Both texts are agreeing that John Fletcher's writing had a unique, easily recognizable style. Choice B, though, that's saying something about comparing the portrayal of women between Fletcher and Massinger, but only text 1 even mentions Massinger at all, and no comparison is made. Choice C would say that this belongs in Shakespeare's complete works, but Sykes would oppose that. And choice D claims that Massinger was paying homage to Shakespeare, but again, Massinger isn't discussed at all in text 2. So the key choice answer is A, where you need to think about, even when interpretations differ, common ground often comes from shared observations, like Fletcher's distinct style. For question 2, pause here, read both texts about nanohybrids and environmental risk. Then decide how the author of text 2 would most likely respond to the underlined portion in text 1. Resume when you're ready. Here's what's happening. Text 1 raises a major concern. When different nanomaterials are combined into a nanohybrid, their properties can change unpredictably, and that could supposedly make a safe material suddenly dangerous. Text 2 agrees that there's reason for concern, but it adds an important point. It states that the effects of nanomaterial conjugation varies case by case. In fact, some combinations, like a silicon dioxide and zinc oxide nanohybrid, actually reduced DNA damage compared to regular zinc oxide. So based on the text, how would the author of text 2 most likely respond to the assertion in the underlined portion of text 1? Choice A says the benefits outweigh the risks, but text 2 isn't that optimistic. It just says that outcomes vary. Choice B suggests that the situation in text 1 is unrepresentative, but text 2 acknowledges that concerns are valid. Choice C says it's unlikely nanohybrids are toxic, but again, text 2 is agreeing that this is a real risk, which leaves us with D. The author of text 2 would agree that the risk raised by text 1 is valid, but also emphasize that nanohybrids don't always turn out worse. So the takeaway here is that real-world data is messy. Always watch out for "it depends" type conclusions in those science passages. Pause here and read both texts about the desertification of the Sahara, and decide how Chris Brearley's team from text 2 would respond to David Wright's theory in text 1. Resume once you've thought it all through. Let's set it up. Text 1 explains Wright's view. He says Neolithic people's adoption of pastoralism, raising livestock, helped dry out the Sahara by overgrazing vegetation. But text 2 challenges that. Brearley's team, using climate vegetation modeling, found that the Sahara's humid period actually ended about 500 years earlier than previous estimates. This earlier timeline suggests that human activities weren't the main cause of desertification. It may have even slowed down the transition by preserving vegetation through selective grazing. So now let's go through the answer choices. Choice A actually fits here perfectly. Brearley would point out that, based on the new timeline, Neolithic people's way of life likely didn't cause desertification. Now let's see why B, C, and D aren't correct. B suggests pastoralism contributed to desertification in multiple ways, but Brearley's team disputes that idea. Choice C says that pastoralism can have mixed effects, but Brearley mostly highlights benefits. And choice D says more research is needed, but Brearley's team draws firm conclusions from their model. So it leaves us with A. And the takeaway here is that a new timeline often reshapes how we interpret cause and effect in history. Pause here and read about the two experiments on umami flavor and soy sauce. Decide what Ishii and O'Mahony from Text 1 and Junger's team from Text 2 would likely agree on. Then click play when you're ready. In Text 1, it describes a 2007 experiment where researchers Ishii and O'Mahony tried to define the pure umami flavor. They used broths made from shiitake mushrooms and kombu seaweed, very traditional umami rich ingredients, and found a strong agreement between Japanese and American judges on the taste. Text 2, however, focuses on a more recent 2022 study. This newer team tried to replicate the flavor of soy sauce itself. They found that simple compounds with low molecular weights didn't capture the flavors. Proteins, including dipeptides, played a huge role not only in umami, but also in saltiness. Now let's go through the choices. Choice A talks about dietary differences between Japanese and American people, which isn't discussed here nor relevant. Choice B talks about molecular weights, which is true, but the first study doesn't get into that, so we can eliminate B. Choice C suggests fermentation introduces flavor-enhancing proteins, but fermentation's effect isn't the focus here. Instead, it's going to be choice D. The broths used in 2007 likely didn't contain the specific dipeptides that the 2022 study found to be key components of soy sauce's taste. So the takeaway is always notice when one study looks at a pure version and another study looks at a more complex, real-world version. Moving on to the next question, read about the difficulty of dating Australopithecus fossils in the Sterkfontein caves, and decide how the researchers from Text 2 would respond to the concern raised in Text 1. In Text 1, it tells us that dating fossils found at Sterkfontein is complicated. Flooding, soil mixing, and relocated animal bones make traditional stratigraphic methods unreliable. Text 2 introduces a solution. Researchers use cosmogenic nuclide dating, analyzing the breccia, the rocks surrounding the fossils, to determine their age more directly. This helps them not needing to rely on mixed up soil layers or displaced animal bones. So the choices state as follows. A says that the fossils themselves were corrupted, but that's not where the problem is. That's with the soil layers and not the fossils. Choice B says combining analysis methods would help, but Text 2 specifically moves away from older, unreliable methods. Choice C is the correct answer. Text 2 is arguing that their new method is better suited to the challenges of Sterkfontein's geology. And D is not correct, because it says cosmogenic nuclide dating analyzes fossils directly, but it actually analyzes the surrounding breccia. So the lesson here is that new methods often arise specifically to handle tricky situations that defeat traditional techniques. For the next question, pause now and read about the difference between crediting contributors in film and TV versus video games, and think about how the author of Text 1 would likely respond to the concerns raised in Text 2. Then click play when you're ready. In Text 1, it says that film and TV productions usually include standardized credit sequences. They're not flashy, but they are highly consistent and helpful for researchers studying careers of those in industry. Text 2 highlights a major problem in video games. Credits are inconsistent, sometimes missing entirely, and that makes it really hard for scholars to trace contributors' work and the history of the medium. So let's go down and break down the options. Choice A says that film and TV researcher methods could be copied, but Text 2 points out that the problem is missing credits, not the research methods. Choice B suggests that credits have a different purpose in gaming, but both media use credits to acknowledge contributions, so it's not B. Choice C says that video game scholars rely more heavily on credits than film researchers, but that's unlikely given that gaming credits are so inconsistent. Which leaves us with D as the final answer. The author of Text 1 would note that film and TV standardized credits largely prevent the kind of research challenges that plague video game scholarship. So the takeaway is that sometimes small standard practices, like consistent credits, have a huge impact on how easily a medium can be studied. For the next question, pause here and read about the influence of Ralph Ellison and broader black literary traditions on Toni Morrison's work. Then decide how the author of Text 2 would likely characterize the claim made in Text 1. When you're ready, hit play. In Text 1, it says that the scenes of characters giving long, sermon-like speeches in Morrison's novels echo Ralph Ellison's influence. It points out similarities in prose style and structure, suggesting a direct line of influence from Ellison to Morrison. Text 2, though, complicates this. It agrees that Morrison's use of sermons destabilizes traditional literary form, but argues that this isn't just because of Ellison. Instead, it's part of a broader community-wide tradition among Black American writers, blending oral and written traditions. So let's look at the choices. Choice A is strong here. It says that text 2 would say that the claim in text 1 fails to consider how both Ellison and Morrison participated in a wider cultural context, not just a one-on-one influence. But why is B, C, and D incorrect? Well, B is talking about misunderstanding other Black writers, but text 2 doesn't focus on others specifically, just that broader tradition. Choice C says the two writers' work diverge structurally and stylistically, but both texts focus on the similarities. And choice D says that the claim itself is part of a tradition, but that's due to a misreading. So the big takeaway is always ask, is the newer text expanding the scope of explanation beyond what the first text is suggesting? For the next question, pause the video now and read about how different scholars assess Virginia Woolf's novel Orlando, and decide how the author of text 2 would respond to the views in text 1. And click play when you're ready. In text 1, it calls Orlando an oddity in Woolf's book of work. Lighter, more fantastical, and with less psychological depth compared to other novels. Woolf herself even once joked that she began it as a joke. In text 2, it acknowledges that Orlando is lighter in tone, but it insists it still tackles Woolf's key themes, like memory and gender roles. Thus, it deserves serious consideration along her other major novels. So let's look at the choices. A says that Woolf's talents were best suited to serious novels, but text 2 defends Orlando as engaging in the series themes too, so it's not A. Choice B suggests Orlando is less impressive, but text 2 again is arguing it's just as important. C fits perfectly here. Text 2 would acknowledge that Orlando is different from Woolf's other classics, but it still insists on its central importance. But D is incorrect because it claims readers overlook Orlando, but neither text is saying that that's happening. So the takeaway here is that just because a work is tonally different doesn't mean that it's thematically unimportant. And that's it for part 3. Great job, you guys. You made it through the hardest cross-text connection questions. Today, we saw how harder SAT questions challenge you to spot subtler agreements, broader traditions, and deeper challenges between texts. If you found this helpful, make sure to like the video, subscribe for more SAT reading strategies, and leave any questions down in the comments. I'll see you in the next series.